Today's scripture reading brings us to 1 Samuel chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8 follows the events of chapter 7. Chapter 7 kind of gave us a clear cutoff. We saw the events leading up to chapter 8 cover, a good at least 3, maybe 4 chapters, just kind of bam, 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 and one leading into the other. Well, chapter 8 there's a division, and chapter 8 takes place probably around 20 or so years after the events of chapter 7. And now we're getting toward the end of Samuel's time as a judge. Samuel's up in years, and that's where we have it. Now, I have this chapter broken down not at all. It is one narrative throughout this chapter, the full 22 verses, and I have that titled, Israel Wants to Be Like Everybody Else. Now, in verse number 3, we see something, and that is, I want to talk about Samuel's sons for a minute. It says here that they walked not in his ways, they turned aside after lucre and took bribes and such. They were living ungodly lives. Why? That's kind of the question. Why do they do that? Well, it really could be for any number of reasons. There's not necessarily fault to be placed at Samuel's feet. However, the actions of a father weigh heavy on their children. Now, it could have been that Samuel, being in the position that he was, gone a lot of the time, that could have had an impact, certainly, on his sons. Because if our society in America has taught us anything, it teaches us that children need their fathers. For the last 50 or so years, we've been told that fathers are unnecessary. But you see the degradation that's happened in our society, and especially if you look through demographically in our country, the largest single-parent homes by a race in our country are young black men. And you see that they are by far the highest incarcerated throughout our nation. Popular culture will tell you it's just because, systemic racism. But no, that's not the case. Truth be told, it's the breakdown of the family. It's because of policies that happened back in the 1960s with the Great Society, which, we don't have time to discuss here. However, it destroyed the black home, the black family, and we are seeing the results of that now. Listen, children need fathers, not only to be present, but to be involved in their lives. It's so important. So, again, I'm not saying that that's the cause. We have no idea why, but I'm just throwing that out there because it's a valid point that needs to be made. Verse number 5, we see that the children of Israel, they want to be just like everybody else. They want to be like all the other nations. But the thing about it was, the thing that made Israel powerful, the thing that made them special, was that they weren't like everybody else. Right? Every other nation had a king. They didn't. That's what made them special. God was their king. But they wanted to be just like everybody else. Christians, we are different. We shouldn't desire to be like everybody else. But all too often in Christians, that's what they want to be. They want to be just like everybody else. But what makes us special is that we're not, right? Much more could be said on that. Save it for another day. All right, verse number 7. We see here that Samuel felt rejected because the children of Israel wanted a king. I understand how that feels. I understand how it feels to feel like you have been rejected, to pray and to preach and to serve, and it seems as though, I know how that feels. But as we see in verse number 7, it's something that I have to remind myself of. The Lord tells Samuel, he says, they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should reign over them. I should not reign over them. So the children of Israel, they weren't rejecting Samuel. They were rejecting Samuel's God. And again, as a pastor and a preacher, as you preach Jesus Christ and you're expecting lost souls to move unto him, sometimes it feels like you have failed, or they have rejected you, but they certainly have not rejected the preacher. They've rejected the God in which he's preaching about. Verses 10 through 18, I want you to notice something, the contrast, because the Lord tells him, he says, protest solemnly over what type of king they're going to get. Let them know, give them fair warning of what's going to happen. So in these verses 10 through 18, he begins to tell them, and there's one word that's repeated over and over and over here, and that's the word take. The king that they're going to get is one that is going to take. We see he'll take their sons in verse number 11, take their daughters, verse number 13, take their fields, verse number 14, on and on and on. So when you contrast this, that they're going to get a king that'll take their sons and daughters, their fields, the tenth, their manservants, the goodliest young men, tenth of their sheep. Take. What is the God that they're rejecting? It's the God that has given. It gave them freedom, gave them from bondage in Egypt, gave them manna from heaven, gave them water from a rock, gave them a land good and large, gave them 31 victories over kings and kingdoms. They're rejecting the God that gave for a king that will take. What a tragic situation. In verses 19 through 22, it starts out, it says this, nevertheless. Samuel warned him. He said, man, this is what you're going to get. Nevertheless, that's what they wanted. And again, I know how this feels as well. As I have preached and told them about a God that gives. Nevertheless, they want what is inferior. They want idols and gods in their life that do nothing but take. What a tragedy that is. So, that is 1 Samuel chapter 8, and we will see where this road of destruction will lead. Coming up.